let's get right into this review for Superman. Alright, so Superman is directed by James Gunn, who's the visionary director of the Guardians of the Galaxy and the official CEO of DC Studios starting from 2022. Superman is the first major film for the new DC universe being set up by Gunn, and we have David Corenswet taking up the mantle of Superman this time around. Now to get right into it, what did I think about the cinematic package here? I thought it was a fairly solid, fun time. Definitely more optimistic rather than dubious about the future, and I'm excited to see the progression of Superman and all the other characters involved as this DC universe unfolds potentially for the next decade to come. And to start off, it's important to note that this iteration of Superman is very different to the more recent take like Zack Snyder's grittier version of the Man of Steel. I'd say Gunn's version leans towards the lighthearted tempo, and the film exudes more of a comic booky vibe this time around. And whether the current version of Superman is going to be for you boils down to if you enjoyed his previous films like the Guardians of the Galaxy, if you're on board broadly speaking for a much lighter tone at the core of this Superman screenplay, and if you're alright with witnessing a ton of absurd, B-tier, and maybe sometimes C-tier comic book moments that can feel downright nonsensical at times in the cinematic format. And now before dwelling into the negatives, I'd like to talk about the positives first. I really do think James Gunn has a knack for creating superhero worlds from scratch. There are a lot of other metahumans incorporated into this first Superman film, and it's always pleasing to see how Gunn is able to create the dynamics between these said characters and make everything feel as natural as they can be. But of course, having this many characters doesn't come without its flaws, which I'll dwell more into later. The visuals and CGI here were colorful and fun to witness. I loved watching the action sequences and some particular segments unfold on the big screen. I also appreciated that the screenplay doesn't start right from the origin story, but rather during Superman's early career as an established superhero. There's enough nods into the Kryptonians' backstory throughout the acts, and efficient ways the character dynamics and story arcs are woven into the narrative for me to acknowledge this as a pretty solid, fresh starting point for the DC universe. Now as for the negatives, as much as I loved seeing the variety of character dynamics playing off of each other throughout the different segments, the story does undoubtedly stretch the characters too thin to incorporate them with all the finer details. You aren't able to witness a lot of depth to the majority of these side characters, even by the time credits roll. It's almost like all of them are just there as an appetizer for future films to come. So if you aren't fully aware of these said characters, either from the comic books or elsewhere, I can see how you wouldn't be completely sold by any one of them by just witnessing these characters for this particular screenplay. Again, the story just stretches a lot of them too thin, and it barely manages to meet the minimum requirements needed for their presence to be justified in this screenplay. Also, as this isn't an origin story, there's several pivotal plot holes and explanations left unsaid in how certain aspects or plot points came to be. I'm leaving this vague here as to not get into the spoiler territory, but yeah, it really does throw you off at the deep end at times, and that can be a positive or negative factor depending on how you look at it. Also, I did find some story beats and certain segments to linger longer than it needed to in this 2-hour and 9-minute runtime, particularly towards Act 2. With everything considered, my final score for Superman is 8 out of 10. Again, this was a solid introduction film for Superman. It had enough to keep me enticed for the future of the DC universe, though there was nothing that particularly blew me away within the story here. It just remained a solid time for a good chunk of the acts. I definitely don't think it was perfect, and there's several apparent flaws that do shine throughout the cracks. All the actors did a solid job playing their characters, so kudos to them. And there's still a ton of popcorn entertainment to be had for sure, even if not all of the impact made an effective landing. Anyways, thanks for checking this review out. I'll have more coming out next week, so stay tuned, and I shall see you on my next upload. Until then, peace.